1967, The Dean Martin Show, NBC Studios. Dean Martin sat in the audience, an unusual position for the star of the show. Tonight was different. Tonight, his son Dean Paul Martin was performing on national television with his pop group Dino, Desi, and Billy. Dean Paul was nervous. At 16, he was performing in front of millions of viewers, including his legendary father. The group had some success with their music, but everyone knew the real pressure. Living up to the Martin name, proving he was more than just Dean Martin's kid. The performance went well. The audience applauded. Then, in an unscripted moment, Dean Paul stepped to the microphone and said something directly to his father that wasn't in the script, wasn't rehearsed, and wasn't expected. "Dad, I know I'll never sing like you, but I hope I can make you proud by being myself." The cameras caught it all. Dean Martin, the cool, unflappable king of cool who never showed emotion in public, with tears streaming down his face. That moment would become one of the most honest and heartbreaking displays of a father's love ever captured on live television. Before we explore this touching moment between a father and son, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This isn't just about two entertainers. It's about the weight of expectations, the courage to be yourself, and a father's love that transcends fame and legacy. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and let's begin. Asterisk. Growing up Dean Martin's son. Dean Paul Martin, nicknamed Dino by his family, was born in 1951 into impossible circumstances. How do you develop your own identity when your father is one of the most famous entertainers in the world? How do you pursue your dreams when everyone's already decided what you should become? From the time Dean Paul could understand language, people compared him to his father. Does he have Dean's voice? Will he go into show business? I bet he'll be just like his old man. The expectations were crushing before Dean Paul was old enough to have any of his own. Dean Martin was acutely aware of this pressure. He'd seen other children of celebrities crack under the weight of their parents' fame. He'd watched as some were pushed into careers they didn't want, others rebelled destructively, and still others disappeared entirely from public life, unable to handle the constant comparisons. Dean tried to give his children normal lives. He didn't force them into the spotlight. He didn't use them for publicity. When reporters asked about his kids, Dean would deflect. "They're just kids. Let them be kids." But Dean Paul loved music. He loved performing. And inevitably, people assumed it was because he was trying to be his father. Few people considered that Dean Paul might have inherited his father's genuine passion for music rather than just seeking his approval. The birth of Dino, Desi, and Billy. In 1964, 13-year-old Dean Paul formed a band with Desi Arnaz Jr., son of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, and Billy Hinch. The trio called themselves Dino, Desi, and Billy, a name that immediately identified them as the sons of legends. Their first single, "I'm a Fool," became a surprise hit, reaching number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100. They appeared on television shows, played sold-out concerts, and developed a genuine fan base. But the success came with a constant question. Were they successful because of their talent, or because of their famous fathers? Dean Paul felt this pressure acutely. Every review mentioned his father. Every interview asked about growing up as Dean Martin's son. Every performance was judged not just on its own merits, but in comparison to Dean Martin's legendary career. The teen music press was particularly harsh. Articles would have headlines like, "Can Dean Martin's son sing?" or "Dino Jr., living in his father's shadow." Some reviews were openly dismissive. The Martin name is the only thing keeping this group afloat. Dean Paul read these reviews. They hurt. But he kept performing because he genuinely loved music, not because he was trying to replace or match his father. Dean Martin's private concerns. Dean Martin watched his son's career with mixed emotions. He was proud that Dean Paul had found something he loved. He was pleased that the boy had genuine talent and was working hard. But he worried about the comparisons, the expectations, and the inevitable disappointments that come with being the child of a legend. Dean and Dean Paul had talked about this on several occasions. Dean tried to prepare his son for the realities of public life. "Dino, people are always going to compare you to me. It's not fair, but it's what will happen. You need to decide if you can live with that." "I know, Dad, but I'm not trying to be you. I just want to make music. I know you're not trying to be me, but some people won't see that. They'll only see Dean Martin's kid and judge you based on whether you measure up to me. That's a burden I hate for you to carry." Dean Paul, with the confidence of youth, would assure his father, "I can handle it. I love music. That's enough." But Dean saw the hurt in his son's eyes when reviews dismissed his talent. He saw the frustration when people assumed Dean Paul was only successful because of his father's name. He saw his son struggling with the same question every child of a celebrity faces. Who am I when I'm not my parents' child? The invitation to the Dean Martin Show. In 1967, Dean Paul's group was invited to perform on the Dean Martin Show, one of the most popular variety shows on television, with millions of viewers every week. It was a huge opportunity and a complicated one. On one hand, it was national exposure that could boost the group's career. On the other hand, it reinforced the narrative that Dean Paul's success came from his father's influence. Of course he's on the Dean Martin Show, his dad's the host. Dean and Dean Paul discussed it before accepting the invitation. "Dino, you don't have to do this," Dean said. "I don't want you feeling like you're riding my coattails." "Dad, we want to do it. It's a great opportunity. And besides, if we turn it down because I'm worried about what people think, then I'm still letting the comparisons control me. I'd rather just perform and let the music speak for itself." Dean nodded, understanding his son's logic, but still worried about the scrutiny this performance would bring. The week before the show. As the performance date approached, Dean Paul became increasingly nervous. This wasn't just any TV appearance. This was performing on his father's show, in front of his father, with millions of people watching and judging whether Dean Martin's son had inherited his father's talent. The pressure manifested in small ways. Dean Paul practiced obsessively. He'd run through the song dozens of times, trying to make it perfect. He'd ask his bandmates, "Was that good enough? Should we do it again?" Desi Arnaz Jr. and Billy Hinch noticed their friend's anxiety. They understood. They were also sons of famous parents. But Dean Paul's situation was unique because he'd be performing on his own father's show. The night before the taping, Dean Paul couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about all the ways it could go wrong. What if he forgot the lyrics? What if his voice cracked? What if the audience compared him to his father and found him lacking? I just want to around 2 a.m., Dean Paul went to his father's study, where Dean was watching television and having a drink. Dean looked up and immediately saw his son's anxiety. "Can't sleep, kiddo? I'm nervous about tomorrow, Dad. What if I mess up? What if people think I'm not good enough?" Dean set down his drink and looked at his son seriously. "Dino, let me tell you something. I've been performing for over 20 years. I still get nervous before shows. That never goes away. But here's what I've learned. You can't control what people think. You can only control whether you're true to yourself. But everyone's going to compare me to you." "Let them," Dean interrupted gently. "You know what? They're right to compare. You're my son. You grew up hearing me sing. It makes sense that you'd want to sing too. But here's the thing. You're not trying to be me. You're trying to be Dean Paul Martin. And that's enough. That's more than enough. What if it's not enough for everyone else?" Dean smiled sadly. "Then that's their problem, not yours. You perform tomorrow because you love music. Not to prove anything to anyone. Not to live up to my name. Just because you love it. Can you do that?" Dean Paul nodded, though the anxiety didn't completely disappear. But his father's words gave him something to hold on to. The day of the show. The day of the taping arrived with all the nervous energy that live television brings. The Dean Martin Show was filmed in front of a live studio audience with minimal editing, so mistakes would be broadcast to millions of viewers. Dean Paul, Desi, and Billy arrived early for rehearsal. The studio was familiar to Dean Paul. He'd visited his father at work countless times. But today it felt different. Today he wasn't just Dean Martin's son visiting the set. He was a performer in his own right. The rehearsal went smoothly. The cameras were positioned, the lighting was set, the sound levels were checked. Everything was professional and efficient. But Dean Paul's anxiety continued to build. What made it worse was the crew's treatment of him. Everyone was extra careful, extra polite. "Is everything okay, Mr. Martin? Do you need anything, Mr. Martin?" He knew they were being deferential because of his father, not because of him, and it reinforced his feeling of being defined by someone else's identity. Dean's unusual decision. As the showtime approached, Dean Martin made an unusual decision. Typically, he'd be backstage or in his dressing room during guest performances, only coming out for specific segments. But for Dean Paul's performance, Dean asked the producers if he could sit in the audience. This was highly unusual. The star of the show sitting in the audience? It would be captured on camera. It would become part of the broadcast. But Dean insisted. "I want to watch my son perform like any other proud father would." The producers agreed, though they worried about the attention it would draw. They were right to worry. Dean's presence in the audience would become the story as much as the performance itself. The performance begins. The show opened with Dean's typical monologue, jokes, banter with the audience, that easy charm that made the Dean Martin Show so popular. Then, after a commercial break, Dean introduced the musical guests. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a special treat tonight. 3 talented young men who happen to include my son. But don't hold that against them. They're actually pretty good. Please welcome Dino, Desi, and Billy. The audience applauded as the 3 teenagers took the stage. Dean Paul saw his father in the audience and felt a wave of emotion. Pride, fear, love, anxiety, all mixed together in a way that made it hard to breathe. The song they'd chosen was The Rebel Kind, one of their recent singles. It was upbeat, catchy, and showcased their harmonies. The performance started well. The 3 young men sang confidently, their voices blending nicely. The audience responded positively. Dean Paul could see his father in the 3rd row, watching intently. Dean's face showed no expression, the famous cool exterior that had made him a legend. But Dean Paul knew his father well enough to see the slight tension around his eyes. His dad was nervous for him. Halfway through the song, Dean Paul caught his father's eye. Dean gave the smallest nod, barely perceptible but clear to his son. It was a gesture that said, "You're doing great. I'm proud of you." That nod relaxed something in Dean Paul. His performance became more confident, more natural. He stopped thinking about comparisons and expectations and just focused on the music. The unscripted moment. The song ended to strong applause. The group was supposed to wave, thank the audience, and exit the stage. But as the applause died down, Dean Paul made a split-second decision. He stepped back to the microphone. The production crew looked confused. This wasn't in the script. The cameras stayed on him, unsure what was happening. The audience went quiet, waiting. Dean Paul looked directly at his father and spoke from the heart. "Say something to my dad, if that's okay." He paused, gathering courage. "Dad, I know I'll never sing like you. My voice isn't as smooth. I don't have your timing or your style. I've spent my whole life hearing how great you are, and you know what? They're right. You are great." The audience was completely silent. This wasn't the usual show business patter. This was real. "But I hope I can make you proud by being myself. By finding my own voice, even if it's different from yours. By doing what I love, the way you taught me to do what I love. That's all I want, Dad. Just to make you proud by being me." The moment that broke Dean Martin. The cameras immediately cut to Dean in the audience. For perhaps the first time in his entire career, Dean Martin's famous cool completely crumbled on national television. Tears streamed down his face. Not delicate, camera-ready tears, real, uncontrolled crying. His shoulders shook. He tried to compose himself, to maintain that image of unflappable coolness, but he couldn't. The audience saw it. The millions of viewers at home saw it. The king of cool, the man who never showed weakness, completely breaking down because his son had expressed the one thing Dean had most wanted to hear. "I'm not trying to be you, Dad. I'm trying to be myself, and I hope that's enough." Dean stood up from his seat and walked onto the stage. The cameras followed him. He pulled Dean Paul into a tight embrace, still crying, not caring that millions of people were watching. "You already make me proud," Dean whispered into his son's ear, though the microphone caught it. "Every single day. Not because of your singing, because of who you are." The audience erupted in applause. Several people in the studio audience were crying too. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a raw, honest moment between a father and son, captured accidentally on live television. The production chaos. Backstage, the production crew was in chaos. This wasn't scripted. They were several minutes behind schedule. The next segment was supposed to start, but the director, looking at the monitors showing Dean and Dean Paul embracing on stage, made a decision. "Keep the cameras rolling. We'll figure out the rest later." For nearly 3 full minutes, an eternity in live television, the cameras stayed on Dean and Dean Paul. Eventually, Dean composed himself enough to speak to the audience. "Sorry, folks. That wasn't in the script. But my son just said something that, well, you saw what it did to me." He wiped his eyes, trying to laugh at himself. "Some cool guy I turned out to be, huh?" The audience laughed warmly. Dean Paul stood beside his father, also crying now, but smiling too. "I want everyone to know," Dean continued, his voice still shaky. "My son is one of the most talented, hardworking, genuine people I know. The fact that he's my son is just luck on my part. He'd be special no matter whose kid he was. The immediate aftermath. When the show ended, Dean and Dean Paul went back to Dean's dressing room. For a while, they just sat there, not talking, processing what had just happened. Finally, Dean Paul spoke. "I didn't plan that, Dad. It just came out." "I know, kiddo. That's why it was perfect. Are you mad that I made a scene on your show?" Dean laughed, though it was still shaky. "Mad? Dino, that was the most honest moment I've ever had on television. I've been performing for 25 years, and I've never been more real than I was tonight when you said those words. I meant them, Dad. I've been so worried about living up to your legacy, trying to prove I'm as good as you." "Stop," Dean interrupted. "That's the thing you need to understand. You don't have to be as good as me. You just have to be good at being you. And you already are." The public reaction. The segment became one of the most talked about moments in television history. The next day, newspapers ran the story with headlines like "Dean Martin breaks down on live TV" and "Real emotion on the Dean Martin show." But the tone of the coverage was overwhelmingly positive. Critics praised the authenticity of the moment. Viewers called it the most genuine thing they'd ever seen on a variety show. Many people wrote letters to NBC saying they'd cried along with Dean. More importantly, the coverage of Dean Paul's group changed. Instead of dismissive articles about Dean Martin's kid trying to sing, reviews started recognizing the group's genuine talent. The narrative shifted from living in his father's shadow to finding his own voice. One particularly influential review in Billboard magazine captured the change. Dean Paul Martin proved on national television that he understands something many children of celebrities never grasp. He doesn't need to match his father's success to have value. His willingness to be himself, expressed so honestly on the Dean Martin show, suggests a maturity beyond his years. Dean Paul's liberation. In the weeks after that performance, Dean Paul felt a weight lift. He'd said out loud what he'd been carrying silently, that he knew he wasn't his father, would never be his father, and was okay with that. And his father's response, those tears that embrace those words of affirmation, had freed Dean Paul from the impossible burden of expectations. Dean Paul continued performing with Dino, Desi, and Billy for several more years. The group had moderate success. They were never huge stars, but they built a solid career. More importantly, Dean Paul seemed happier, more confident, less weighed down by comparisons. He eventually moved away from music entirely, pursuing other interests including tennis and flying. He became an accomplished pilot and joined the California Air National Guard. He found his identity separate from being Dean Martin's son, though he never stopped being proud of his father. Dean's lasting impact. That moment on the Dean Martin show became Dean's most cherished memory. In later years, when Dean was asked about his career highlights, all the hit records, sold-out shows, movies, awards, he'd often mention that night with Dean Paul. "I've had a lot of great moments on stage," Dean told a reporter in the 1970s. "But nothing meant more than my son telling me he just wanted to be himself. And nothing felt better than being able to tell him that's exactly what I wanted for him." Dean kept a copy of that show's footage in his personal collection. After Dean Paul's tragic death in a plane crash in 1987, Dean would sometimes watch that clip, crying again at the memory of his son's words and the love they'd shared in that unguarded moment. The weight we put on our children. Dean Paul Martin's unscripted words and Dean Martin's uncontrolled tears teach us profound lessons about family, expectations, and authentic love. 1. Children feel the weight of our expectations. Even when we don't explicitly demand that our children match our achievements, they feel the pressure. Dean never told Dean Paul he had to be a great singer. But Dean Paul still carried the burden of the Martin name. Children sense what we want from them, whether we say it or not. 2. The greatest gift we can give our children is permission to be themselves. Dean Paul didn't need his father to teach him to sing or help him become successful. He needed his father to tell him it was okay to be different, okay to forge his own path, okay to not be Dean Martin 2.0. That permission, granted so publicly and emotionally, was more valuable than any professional guidance could have been. 3. Authentic moments connect deeper than perfect performances. Dean Martin was a professional entertainer who'd performed flawlessly thousands of times. But his most memorable TV moment was when he completely lost control and cried on camera. Why? Because authentic emotion connects with people in ways that perfect performances never can. We remember real moments, not polished ones. 4. Vulnerability is strength, not weakness. Dean Martin built his career on being cool, unflappable, in control. But the moment millions of people felt closest to him was when he lost that cool completely. His tears didn't make him seem weak. They made him seem human, relatable, and deeply loving. 5. The best parents celebrate their children's uniqueness. Dean didn't need Dean Paul to be a legendary singer. He just needed Dean Paul to be happy and authentic. That's what every child ultimately needs from their parents. Not pressure to achieve, but permission to be themselves, fully and unapologetically. The modern relevance. We live in an era of extraordinary pressure on children. Social media amplifies comparisons. College admissions are more competitive than ever. Parents feel pressure to produce successful offspring, and children feel pressure to match or exceed their parents' achievements. Dean and Dean Paul's story reminds us that the healthiest families are those where children are loved for who they are, not for what they achieve. Where parents celebrate uniqueness rather than demanding replication. Where being yourself is considered success, regardless of external measures. Your turn. If this story made you think about the expectations we place on children, our own or others, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being yourself is enough, that you don't have to match anyone else's achievements to have value. Drop a comment. Have you ever felt the weight of someone else's expectations? Or have you put that weight on someone you love? How did you handle it? Remember, Dean Paul Martin said, "I hope I can make you proud by being myself." And Dean Martin cried because that's exactly what he'd always wanted for his son. The greatest gift we can give the people we love is permission to be authentically themselves. No comparisons. No expectations to match us. Just acceptance and celebration of who they actually are. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the human stories that remind us that love isn't about achievement. It's about acceptance, that the best legacy isn't replication, it's liberation, and that the strongest families celebrate differences rather than demanding sameness.